What will happen to broadcasting after COVID-19 is a very interesting question. Certainly, for the first time in my career, we're almost exclusively relying on Skype interviews. Will that change our standards? Will we become more accustomed to that? It's certainly allowed us not only to cope with the virus, but allows us to get much better guests on. For example, when we had the Olympic story, we had Seb Coe, we had the athletes, we had the Japanese Prime Minister, all because we were happy to do Skype and they were happy to do Skype. Anybody who tells you they know what's going to happen to any industry after this crisis, I think is making it up. But I think it will be very interesting to see how COVID-19 changes broadcasting and whether it makes us more tolerant of mediums like Skype. Since the COVID-19 crisis began, viewership is up through the roof. We've never seen anything like it. It's even more significantly up on digital, so people are clearly desperate for information. Whether that's to do with people from working from home, or is it more just that people are fascinated by the story, I couldn't tell you. I suspect it's the latter, because even before the lockdown, our figures had never been higher across all platforms. I think the thought of getting other health stories on at the moment is going to be very, very difficult. We're so up to our eyes in COVID-19, even now that it might begin to calm down a bit. And actually, I think there might be a lull for a bit, but I think it's going to ramp up again when the crisis picks up. I think the other stories we'll be looking for are non-health related because so much of the main diet is health-based. Obviously, there's a very strong running interest in businesses that are immediately affected by COVID-19, the hospitality, leisure, gyms, etc. I think the stories of how those businesses manage to survive, and hopefully they do, will continue to introduce the media throughout the crisis. Equally, I think there are interesting stories about businesses that are doing well, e.g. supermarkets and so on, but also stories about businesses that are helping their employees and also how they're adapting to cope with the crisis. A lot of people are still working. There is a real appetite for that as well. There is a very important story to tell about charities, and that is their struggle to survive at the moment. I don't think charities should be pitching stories about work they're doing so much around their causes, but how they need government help and how all fundraising routes have dried up. There's a lot of interest in that. We've done some stories on that. Equally, if charities are helping with some of the victims of COVID-19, that will play very well. But the story I think charities PR should be pushing very hard is why is business being helped and why is charity possibly being abandoned. I think April Fool's campaigns are foolhardy at the moment, forgive the pun. The peak of the crisis is still 2.5 weeks off. April the 1st, I think, will be in the middle of it, will be much worse than we are now. So trying to have fun in the sense of an April Fool's Day prank, I think will be inappropriate. That's not to say that news companies aren't looking for stories that uplift people, but they're looking more in the line of heroes or people doing extraordinary things against COVID-19, but in general. So it's outstanding endeavour rather than ha-ha that people are looking for. BRoll, I think there's a real appetite for BRoll at the moment because of the restrictions. I think there'll be almost more appetite for it than is normally. The quality's always got to be good. I don't think the expectation of the quality has got to be good. And obviously, we won't want to take anything where we think safety standards have been compromised, i.e. cameraman getting too close to the people they're filming. But I think there might be some very creative ways that PRs and media, news media, can work together so that we avoid too many people who aren't in, who don't work in an office going into that office for filming opportunities. Panic buying has been one of the stories of COVID-19 so far. I think the more brands and companies involved in food retail can show to customers that there is enough there is enough food on the shelves, the better. I think also some of the panic buying stories actually been a bit unfair. I'm not sure people are panic buying. I think people are just having to buy a lot more food from the supermarket than they used to. For example, if you've got 4 kids like I do, normally they're fed at school, suddenly you've got to stack up a load of food. So I think there's been a rush to blame people queuing for supermarkets when I'm not sure they've had all that much choice. Over the last 10 days, we have on Sky exclusively covered COVID-19. Virtually nothing else has broken through. The only stories I can remember covering in any depth are the Alex Salmon trial and the Windrush report. It really has been, despite our efforts to do other things, COVID-19. That's just not the scale of the story, but it's just affecting everything. All our business stories are COVID-19, all our sports stories, the end of the Olympics are COVID-19. I think that's beginning to change. We've been doing hour-long special 10 o'clock newses every night on Sky News, so have other channels. I think we're beginning to rein that in. Quite how long that lasts, we'll see. As much of that is to do with members of our own staff beginning to get sick, etc., and exhaustion in covering the story. So I think it'll be reined in a bit, but so far it's been very much COVID-19. PRs, whenever they ask me advice, I always give the same response. Always milk your relationships. Blind drops, even at quiet news times, are quite hard, rarely gain traction. You've got to get to know people, particularly at a busy time. Journalists at the moment are so busy, they're not really going to read emails from people they don't know. Focus on the people you know and target them with stories rather than going for the scattergun approach. The software we prefer for live interviews is Skype. With FaceTime, we've had real problems with data protection. Sometimes people's phone numbers have flashed up. If something goes wrong with the feed drops out and so on, Skype seems much more secure on that front. So actually, we only use Skype. I've only just begun using Zoom personally, but I don't know if that will become, or other platforms will become ways of interviewing people. But it's Skype for us all the way. Are we seeing a renewed trust in broadcast media? I think it's far too early to say. I mean, this crisis is still so new. It's only a few weeks old. And the issues of trust in the media have been rotting away for years, even decades. So possibly, maybe, but we will see. And I think a lot of it depends on how this crisis turns out. If it's deemed that ultimately there's been a bit of an overreaction, I think there could be another backlash against the media. If, though, as seems likely, lots of people die, which will be horrible and horrific for everyone, maybe trust in the media will be restored, because the media's reported it, I think, very well so far. The stories that people are really engaging with are news you can use, information. People want to know what this disease is, what they can do to avoid it, how it's transmitted. And then in terms of the impact, anything that helps people in the current situation they're in. So if you're a business that's struggling because you've lost all your trade because of the lockdown, any journalism which tells you what you might be able to do, who you can speak to, etc., is really connecting. People are hungry for information as much as they are for news. The proportion of staff now working at home in all broadcast media, Sky, BBC and ITN, is very, very high. If you look at Channel 4 News, they've been presenting from home. The Today programme has been presented from home. Nearly all radio programmes have been presented from home. So everybody, I think, in all parts of the industry are sending everyone except essential staff to the output or critical staff, or people who need to be in the building, getting them to work from home, using the technology of Zoom, etc., so to make sure to preserve the safety of our staff. Well, I hope all of you found that useful, with some tips on how to work and get the attention of journalists during the COVID-19 virus. Stay safe most of all. Thanks very much.